It was the Hamas itself that
Exactly.
documented October 7th.
So, and then what does he do in the conclusion? He says, well, if Israel really cares about sex crimes, then they should do something about what is happening in Israeli prisons. What a inversion. What a moral inversion, and what an inversion of facts. It is almost remarkable to watch.
The Hamas made a useful idiot out of the New York Times and this writer, Nick Kristof. I mean, this is a Hamas strategy. This is an important point here. It's not that Kristof said in the article that he went out seeking. You could seek out thousands of people who will lie, cheat, and steal and tell you anything, whether it's the Al Ali Hospital or whether it was Sua Arafat, Arafat's wife at the time, who told Hillary Clinton back in 1996 that Israel poisons the water. I mean, these are classic anti-Semitic blood libel tropes. It's nothing new. What is in this article is a continuation of decades of blood libels, of egregious lies, and I think that they have to be put on trial in the court of international public opinion, because the crimes that they committed against what is called journalistic ethics are so severe. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and welcome to an urgent and special discussion here at JCFA following one of the most egregious examples of journalistic malpractice. Even Professor Alan Dershowitz called it a worse case than the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I'm joined by one of the greatest experts in that field in the world, Olga Deutsch, who is the incoming president and chief executive officer of NGO Monitor, well known for a quarter of a century for exposing political warfare organizations masked as human rights groups and organizations. And this is exactly the situation, Olga, that we find ourselves in following this horrific a piece of, let's call it political activism, dressed up as journalism and legitimized by the New York Times brand.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dan. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all that you do and for giving platform to NGO Monitor and me for sharing some of our insights into what you righteously call is a preposterous, outrageous, I wouldn't even call it article. It was a piece of activism platformed, sadly, by one of the biggest papers in the world. It felt like a violation of everything we stand for as the Jewish community and as the state of Israel, the only Jewish homeland, right, in the world, violating everything we defend in such a horrific and libelous way that, as you say, we haven't seen this in a very long time, and we've seen quite a lot in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely, we have. And in fact, it's extraordinary just to launch this piece that we at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs and you as NGO Monitor always make it a top priority. And I remember for years, one of our great mentors, Professor Gerald Steinberg, the founder of NGO Monitor, and today, of course, continues to be extremely involved in leading the organization together with you, has said that we maintain both organizations at a very high level of professionalism and statism, if you will, and not launching into diatribes. But I have to tell you, Olga, this is the first time in my career that this New York Times screed was actually a journalistic affiliation with October 7th itself. It was a rape, not only of the Jewish people. It was a rape not only of the nation state of the Jewish people, it was a rape of the truth. And it is no irony that the article itself that Nick Kristof penned, called "The Silence That Meets the Rape of Palestinians," it's no coincidence that this came out 12 hours before the official Israeli, or the Civil Commission Israeli report on the unparalleled sexual violence and torture, murder, and mass rape of October the 7th. It is no coincidence that it short-circuited the real report and then co-opted the language of Israel's report. it is not well enough known in the United States and the West of this timing. We have tried in our media interviews to make that very clear to people, and that's only the tip of the iceberg as to the malign behavior of the organization of the writer Nick Kristof, who, by the way, has won Pulitzer Prizes, and his great legitimacy and reputation it just adds to the extraordinary atrocity that has been really committed here. And we're about to go into what Mr. Kristof never points out in the paper, in which I'm hoping certainly that we in the non-government space and official Israel will continue to prosecute these points as to whom exactly are these sources that the New York Times place their trust in, which you have at NGO Monitor have done a tremendous job in exposing as terror-linked organizations. These sources help us understand a little bit about what we're talking about in this the silence that meets the rape of Palestinians, which short-circuited Silence No More. That was the official civil commission's report on mass rape. Who are these sources in the Times?
Let me try to, I think that the attack itself, accusing Israeli government to systematically sending the prisoner guards to rape prisoners or to train dogs, which was clearly debunked, as it has never happened, to rape on command people. I think is so ridiculous that on its own, it is horrific to me that all of us have to go and debunk this. But this article or opinion piece, to my mind, is extremely important because it serves as a perfect showcase of what are we fighting against. Professor Gerald Steinberg, our founder and still president, pinpointed 25 years ago in a very pioneer manner that weaponization of human rights will be the main vehicle of persecuting Jews and the state of Israel moving forward. And this article is a culmination and a coronation of that. They're basically taking every human rights issue and flipping it against us. We see how the most renowned names in the best known papers are used to normalize libelous anti-Semitic language against the state of Israel, and thus pushing us into the defense, right? Because now we have to prove that New York Times is false. Now we have to prove that Kristof, who has a stellar reputation of speaking on behalf of the oppressed, is false. And then finally, we have completely false claims, lies, parroted by, at worst, Hamas mouthpiece organizations.
That was the Euromed,
the Euromed Human Rights Council,
right.
Geneva-based organization, as well as the other three NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are quoted as sources to this horrific piece.
Can you mention?
Yes, it's Norwegian Refugee Council, which is one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world. Save the Children, yet another huge organization that has an incredible reputation of speaking on behalf of children's rights. B'Tselem, well known for every Israeli organization that claims to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people and the violations of their human rights.
And then there's the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is another, which has been shown to be an Israel cancellation organization. Not, they use the word, Kristof used the word critical of Israel. No, not critical of Israel. Canceling Israel completely.
Let's debunk. Let's go into, and by doing that, we will basically illustrate to the viewers and listeners how this whole machinery against us works. It's a perfect showcase. So let's start with the Euromed Human Rights Council, because it is the worst of them all. For years, they have served as Europe base for Hamas. Their current chair and their former chair are known to be Hamas affiliated. They were designated by the Israeli government as Hamas leaders in Europe. They served in another organization that was also designated by the Israeli Security Defense Ministry as Europe Hamas base. There are records of all of them taking photos with Ismail Haniyeh and celebrating
The former
that.
leader of Hamas.
Exactly. A couple of hours after the report, the CNN ran the report of the committee on the rape crimes that Hamas perpetrated on October the 7th. The current chair of this organization tweeted that this is all fabrication and a proof that how research is not done, where actually their reports are exactly that libelous claims. The dog raping libel is something that we have seen years ago. This is the organization that revamps the blood libel, the medieval blood libel, and accuses Israel, Israeli soldiers, Israeli government for being bloodthirsty, and then taking it to the next level and saying, is this a religious doctrine? So turning, a political regime into a religious doctrine of the Jews. So like
It says classical anti-Semitism.
Classical anti-Semitism, where Zionism and anti-Semitic tropes are intertwined and become one. So this is the Geneva-based. Now let's, in parallel, analyze how Christoph also talks about them. You mentioned he profiles them as Geneva-based human rights group, often critical of Israel. They're not often critical of Israel. That's all they do: spread libels against Israeli government, Israeli people, Jews, and serve as the front for Hamas.
By the way, Sami Al-Sai, who was the so-called freelance journalist who's associated with Euromed, has long made these claims of rape, and even for several years, there was no legal action. There was no complaint. He actually, and Christoph, had he been a responsible journalist, he would have raised the issue that this Sami Al-Sai, as I checked with the justice echelon here in Israel, he actually submitted a petition to the Supreme Court against his detention and made no mention of any misbehavior, made no mention of any rape or sexual impropriety of any kind. So he himself proved his own lie by omission.
It's such a horrific piece, and it's actually ridiculous that Christoph would put his name on this, or that New York Times ran it and now refuses to denounce it or edit it. The same group, Euromed, right? Their program director praises himself on social media that his brother is basically a freedom fighter for Hamas. So the Hamas links are very well documented out there in the open. Anyone can go and check it. By the way, we on our website, it is all sourced to the original sources, so anyone can check this. Now, throughout the article, Christoph also repeats, there is no evidence that the Israeli government has ever issued an order. However, and this is another quite telling method of the campaign against us. So they're not going to accuse you of actually doing that, but they're going to create a reality and an atmosphere throughout an article. And you and I discussed this just before entering the studio, how long the article is.
Yeah, between 3,000 and 4,000 words.
Which is insane.
Insane.
Insane. When I send in an op-ed, it has to be 700 words.
Precisely.
So it is a repeated creation of a reality, of a feeling of a reader. I cannot prove any of the claims. And the article even says, I could not verify most of the stories, but that's probably because everyone is scared. There is no evidence that the Israeli government ever issued an order like that. However, it is to assume, based on what?
By the way, they quote one of the direct quotes taken in the article says that it is a result of state-sponsored directive. So to rape. In other words, he denies it, but then he quotes someone who makes this even more outrageous claim, and
And he
then
says, I cannot prove it, yet he quotes these organizations, these NGOs, by saying it is well documented, but none of it can be proved. Let's take a look at the other organizations.